This is the most notorious haunted house in the world. It is to be found in the sleepy seaside town of Amityville, an hour away from the hustle and bustle of New York City. 30 years ago, a truly horrifying crime was committed here, when 6 members of the DeFeo family were shot dead in a single night. Even now, the details of exactly how these brutal murders were carried out remain shrouded in mystery. 1 year later, the Lutz family moved in. They fled from the house, having lived there for only 28 days, claiming that they had been driven out by terrifying and unexplained supernatural forces. Their story was the subject of a media frenzy, turned them into celebrities, and became a worldwide bestseller, The Amityville Horror. It would spawn numerous books and films, including one that was released just this year. Mediums and psychic investigators have claimed there is a curse on the property. Others say that the Lutz's story is no more than a clever money-making scheme, built on the gruesome history of the house.
It is probably one of the most haunted homes in the world. It's certainly one of the most publicized haunted homes in the world.
Whatever happened, it was a confluence of events and personalities, and it meshed to form the perfect psychic storm.
It's just this web of lies, and the motivation was simple enough.
They produced a beautiful commercial scam. Their version is not a true story, but if they call it a true story, you know, how could you say that they're liars?
There were too many things that had happened and were going on to sit there in denial that something wasn't right with this.
I guess the Amityville Horror really is supposed to be me, because I'm the one that got convicted of killing my family. I'm the one that said did it. I'm the one that's supposed to be possessed by the devil.
What is the truth about the house in Amityville? And is there really a curse on all who live there? The mysteries and controversies surrounding the Amityville story begin with the horrific events that took place on the night of November 13th, 1974, when 6 members of the DeFeo family, mother, father, and 4 children, were shot to death inside this house.
I had an office in the front of my house, and I was sitting in the office, and my friend Al Saxon comes in, and he said, "Rufus, I got something to tell you. You're not going to believe this." He says, "Everybody next door is dead."
We saw several of the bodies being taken out. I'm sorry to say one of the children's bodies fell off the tarp they were carrying it in, and I saw one of the murdered children.
It was ghastly, but pretty straightforward murder case, or at least that's what I thought at the time.
It was just very eerie. It was very quiet, and just a chilling, frozen moment, the kind that you'd never forget. It's a picture that you keep in your head always.
Here you had the so-called idyllic suburban family, Italian Catholic. The family had its own business, which was an auto dealership. And of course, with an Italian surname, there are the inevitable whispers about connections to organized crime.
A mob killing was quickly ruled out, and the police began to focus on the only surviving member of the family, 23-year-old Ronald DeFeo Jr.
George Harrison came, who was chief of detectives over in Suffolk County, and he said, "Can I use your house for a while for our headquarters?" Everybody in my neighborhood was scared to death that there's somebody loose in this town.
From the beginning, Butch DeFeo, Ronnie DeFeo Jr., was suspected. He was originally not arrested. He was taken into protective custody.
They decided now they're going to take the Ireland's house, which was next door, and turn that into their command post. So they took us all over there.
Next thing I know, they had him in my house, and they were questioning him.
That went on for some time until his grandfather showed up. A police officer heard Ronnie's grandfather tell him, "You'll stop throwing the family name in the mud. I don't want to hear anything more about your sister. Just admit to the murders. It's over."
I told them in the beginning things that were true, but, you know, to get the pressure off of me.
Even before this, the Amityville locals had already made their minds up about who had slaughtered the family.
I walked around the neighborhood and I said, can you tell me anything more about what happened? And almost to the person, every kid said, Ronnie did it, Ronnie did it.
I was in my car. I believe the reporter was Joe Martin. Came on and said that the killings had happened. And they didn't say that Ronnie was dead with them. And I said to my wife that it was Ronnie.
Ronnie was, I'll put it this way, a wild teenager.
He had a reputation for using drugs, for violence, for fighting with his father.
He was a punk. All they did was drink, gamble, and fight. If you knew him, and you knew the situation, I guess, or you ever spent any time around him, it was not something that he was incapable of doing. And when everybody else is dead and he's not, you know.
There was a lot of problems, you know. And it's not that I could sit here and lie to you. I could say that I knew something bad was going to happen to my mother and father.
Within a short time afterwards, Ronald DeFeo Jr. was officially named the suspect. He was the alleged murderer. He was the accused.
After a short, sharp interrogation, DeFeo confessed to the crimes and gave the first of many versions of what happened.
The standard story is basically that Ronald DeFeo Jr., who was then 23 in 1974, woke up at approximately 3:15 a.m. and for reasons unknown, basically killed his entire family while they slept.
He took the rifle and shot both of his parents who were sleeping in the master bedroom. Then he shot his younger brothers, 2 of them. And then he went to an adjacent bedroom and shot his sister. And then he walked up to the 3rd floor bedroom and shot his other sister, Dawn.
After what happened, it was like a nightmare. I'm looking at my mother and father dead, my sister. I said, my God. I got scared. I ran out of the house, jumped in my car, ran down the street, and got my friends and came back to the house.
DeFeo's confession did not explain a number of puzzling mysteries about the killings. Mysteries that would prompt rumors of accomplices, conspiracies, or influence.
They were each shot with a .35 Marlin. We had an experiment conducted when we were preparing for trial, the noise level of the .35 Marlin. And that Marlin could be heard 4 to 5 blocks away from the house.
Nobody heard a thing. I did find, however, one of the neighbors who heard at about between 3 and 3:30 in the morning the family's dog barking. It was crying or baying.
With all the shots that took place, there were approximately 9 blasts from a Marlin. There was no evidence that any of the 6 victims had made any attempt to escape.
What was so odd is how you managed to shoot 6 people in the middle of the night in a quiet neighborhood without awakening any of the people. A shotgun blast is pretty loud. That doesn't make any sense.
One might argue maybe they were being held by another until Ronnie came around and did what he did.
I thought perhaps the bodies had been moved from their original spots. The autopsy reports show that no, they were not moved, that they were in the original places that they were when they were shot. There were no drugs found in the bloodstreams. And again, the victims are found lying face down in discharge. There seems to be something almost systematic and very methodical about it that would seem to involve in more than just one person.
The curious anomalies of the crime scene would provide some eerie clues as to who or what had been responsible for the killings in Amityville. After Ronald DeFeo had confessed to shooting his entire family, attorney William Weber found himself faced with the difficult task of defending him. Weber began by investigating what went on in the DeFeo home.
The family life at the DeFeo residence was kind of bizarre and unusual, because on one hand, they appeared to be very religious artifacts throughout the house, statues throughout the exterior of the house. But inside, when Mr. DeFeo was there was constant fighting, bickering, yelling, screaming, activities that would go way beyond normal fighting that families may have.
There were beatings that often would occur for no particular reason, from what I understand. The father would just fall into these terrible rages, and Ronald often became the focus of those rages.
Ronnie's friends were afraid to come into the house because they were just afraid of the father. There was testimony about the father beating the wife in the presence of Ronnie's friends.
And that kind of abuse often leads to abuse of others that are weaker or more subordinate.
So when you look beyond the nice, quiet, suburban street, there were troubles in that family.
Many people told me about the abuse he received as a child from his father. On the other hand, I was also told about the great love he received from his mother and his close relationship with his brothers and one of the two sisters. So he was a very unusual and difficult personality.
We were really a close family, you know. It's a shame what happened, but it happened.
The other thing about Ronald DeFeo, of course, was he immediately started ranting and raving from prison that the devil made him do it.
Some priest was in the courtroom watching my performance on the witness stand. He felt that my performance, I had to be possessed by the devil.
You know, there were echoes of Charles Manson from the late 60s and the Sharon Tate murders in California. Ronald DeFeo had that same wild-eyed look as Charles Manson.
I don't think he was dealing with a full deck. Yeah, you gotta be insane to kill your own family, or well on your way.
I asked a friend and associate, Dr. Daniel Schwartz, to interview him. Dan gave a professional opinion that Ronnie was acting in another state of mind, that he didn't understand the nature of his act.
Weber decided on a plea of insanity. When he interviewed DeFeo about what he remembered happening on the night of the murders, a strange series of events was described that would prompt speculation about who was behind the killings.
Ronnie had taken some drugs. He was watching television, and there was a war picture on. And at the end of the picture, Ronnie was in the room alone. He said initially he thought that he heard members of his family in another room conspiring to kill him. The one thing that he said, and sometimes he said it with a smirk, so I wasn't sure if it was truthful, but he said that a female with black hands gave me the rifle, and I went ahead and shot everybody.
His original testimony was that at some point, a hooded, black-handed demon handed him a weapon, and that he went upstairs, and that he committed the murder. He said the murder, not the murders.
During the trial, one expert argued that DeFeo may not have acted alone.
Herman Race was a criminologist hired by the defense. Herman Race, in a closed courtroom, that means they cleared out the public, told the judge and the prosecutor that some of the bodies had been moved, that they were not all killed in the positions they were found. He also said that he believed that multiple weapons were used, not just one high-powered rifle.
Intriguingly, many years later, journalist Rick Moran was contacted by a drug enforcement agent who told him that he had the DeFeo home under observation at the time of the killings and had seen Ronnie's sister, Dawn, leave the house.
On the night of the murder, that operative did see Dawn DeFeo wearing a snorkel-type jacket and gloves come out of the house with the rifle, throw the rifle into the backseat of her car, and drive out towards the point where the city has a dock, which is exactly where the weapon was found by police divers later on. When he told the police that a hooded, black-handed demon came to him and handed him the weapon, but that he didn't move, I believe that it's true. I don't think he was in any condition to move. The demon that he was talking about was his own sister.
Dawn DeFeo's night clothes show unburnt powder, which indicates she may have fired a rifle that night.
Moran's theory is that Ronnie and his sister Dawn had plotted to kill their parents together.
I think on the night that they decided they were going to do that, Ron was in no condition to be able to do it. And that Dawn took a long rifle and committed the murders. Unfortunately, in the frenzy of it, she apparently decided she was going to take out everybody.
I've always been partial to the idea that indeed something special existed between Ronald DeFeo and his sister Dawn. Now, some say that that was incest, I don't know, but there was a special connection, a special bond, perhaps a bond of secrecy. She was the one that was killed the most violently. The head is just completely exploded.
The theory is that Dawn DeFeo killed the family and that Ronnie, in despair, murdered Dawn. So he's responsible for one murder, which would also explain the grandfather's reaction of, "You'll take all of the routes," because he was the only one who was left, and he didn't want to see anything more about relationships within the household or his family name being sullied.
In fact, the jury found Ronald DeFeo to be guilty of all the murders and to be of sound mind. He was given 6 life sentences in February 1975. The DeFeo home at 112 Ocean Avenue was put up for sale at a knockdown price because of its ghastly history. It was then that George and Kathleen Lutz, newlyweds with a young family, went to view the house, and the next extraordinary chapter of the Amityville horror began.
When you look at enough homes, you get a sense for what feels good to you and what doesn't. This house had no reservations for us. It was the answer to so many different things that we thought would be perfection of a sort. We discussed the events that had happened in the house as a family and came to the decision that we would all be okay with the history of what had happened. But I don't think any of us considered the possibility that there would be something residual there.
According to the Lutzes, there were unsettling occurrences from the very beginning.
Harry tried to hang himself, our dog, our black Labrador retriever. He jumped over the fence, and his chain was too short, and he was actually hanging on the wrong side of the fence, choking to death. That was all within the first hour of moving in.
George Lutz then says that a good friend who knew the history of the house strongly advised him to have it blessed.
The priest came and went about the house blessing and came out and told Kathy and I not to use the one upstairs bedroom we were going to use as a sewing room as a bedroom. He said he felt something in there. And he was slapped. He heard a voice tell him to get out. Those were 2 things that were immediate first day, first few hours.
Within the first few days, George Lutz claims he found himself waking regularly at 3:15 in the morning, feeling restless, uneasy, and often hearing strange noises. Significantly, this was the time when the DeFeo murders were estimated to have taken place.
I got very sick in the house and lost a lot of weight, lost days at work. My own personal hygiene changed there.
He was undergoing personality changes. He would snap at the family. He and Kathy were having arguments. He could not get warm. He was constantly outside chopping wood, building fires. Kathy would go to different rooms in the house and feel different things.
She was embraced by what she felt was someone, a woman. When she told me about it, she was quite frightened and quite disturbed by it.
The Lutzes reported swarms of houseflies infesting certain rooms, highly unusual in midwinter. They were also becoming increasingly anxious about the behavior of their daughter Missy.
Missy started to explain to Kathy that she had a friend, the friend's name was Jody, that had represented itself to her as a large pig. When Jody told her that he was glad she was there and she was going to be living there forever, that was quite disturbing.
As the days went past, the Lutzes claimed that more and more strange things were happening around them.
When you hear screams at night and you hear footsteps at night and the kids are saying strange things and the temperatures in the house vary and the spots that would appear on the carpet in the morning, the progression of certain toilets turning black, the china actually turning black. When you sit down and you start talking about those, then there's obviously something wrong.
They still don't like to talk about what happened that very last night that finally drove them from the house.
We'll never be able to set aside what had gone on that night, all night, and the boys, the way they looked and what they said when they came down that morning.
Come on, babies, come on! Come on, guys!
The Lutz family say they finally fled from the house in the early morning of January 14th, 1976. They would never return.
We did not move in and move out as the same family. All of us were quite frightened by the time we left, and knew of no fear when we moved in. And the fear alone was something that changed all of us.
The Lutzes moved in with Kathy's mother, and George took steps to get the house investigated.
I had contacted a fellow by the name of Kaplan, who had represented himself as a parapsychologist. And to find out he's a vampirologist, and that was supposed to give him credibility, which it didn't with me.
My husband did tell him that we don't charge you anything, but we are a public service organization, and if we find something backing what you say is there, we will tell the public what we found. And if we find that there isn't anything, we'll tell the public that. And if we find that you're putting us on and this is a hoax, we'll also tell them that.
3 days later, George Lutz contacted Kaplan again.
He was very upset by some quote that my husband had said in the newspaper saying that he would be investigating. And he said, I told you I didn't want any publicity, and, you know, I'm going to have to now postpone your investigation for at least a couple of weeks because we didn't want any publicity about this. And my husband found out the next day that that was the same day that Lutz and his wife had given this press conference in the morning. So in the morning he's giving a press conference, and in the evening he's telling us he's canceling our investigation because he doesn't want the publicity.
In an extraordinary twist, this press conference was organized by none other than William Weber, Ronald DeFeo's defense attorney. Weber was now representing DeFeo in the appeal against his earlier conviction. Seemingly, he and the Lutzes had made contact in the immediate aftermath of their leaving the house.
Weber called a press conference with Newsday and told us that Newsday demanded that we be there.
Again, a bell went off with my husband. Why is William Weber, the defense attorney for the mass murderer Ronald DeFeo, now representing this gentleman Lutz, who had moved into the house afterwards, and what's the connection there?
I was approached by a Paul Hoffman, who at the time was a freelance writer for the news, and indicated that the Lutzes would like to meet with me. And I said, you know, I too would like to meet with them because coincidentally I had been given an oral commitment that we would get a large advance for a book and a movie.
Weber never, in those first meetings, ever brought up the idea of that. He was very keen on helping his client get psychological help. At least that's what we were led to believe. We felt that what happened to us was an indication of what quite possibly could have also affected him.
At one particular meeting, Weber claims he revealed some key details of the DeFeo crime, details that were to be of vital significance in the Lutzes' subsequent story.
We were there from about 9 or 10 in the evening to 3 in the morning, drinking wine, and I can't tell you how many bottles of wine we had, but it was many. I had photographs of the crime scene, and based upon the photographs and other facts that I had related, we developed what ultimately turned out to be part of the Lutzes' version of the possession aspect of the case.
The Lutzes let me listen to a tape recording that they had made with William Weber. And in fact, George Lutz, before playing the tape, prefaced his remarks to me and said, I'm not particularly proud of this.
For instance, I showed them pictures of the blackish, greenish fingerprint powder that was all over the house, put there by the police who were looking for fingerprints. And they said, wow, look, there's the slime coming from the doors. We had pictures of Dawn's third-floor bedroom that had dead flies all over it. Well, they took Dawn's room and they had flies flying around all the time. They supplemented the facts that I was telling them about the case, and it all appeared in their book.
I think when they sobered up, or the cold light of day, they felt, maybe this didn't feel right to them. But in this tape, William Weber already had, he was purporting to say, hey, we can get movies, books, film rights. He was already talking about percentages and cutting deals.
He was in the process of putting together some kind of book and movie contract with DeFeo, and he sent a contract to our house that included paying DeFeo some 5% of whatever the proceeds were. So Weber was involved in actually trying to pay DeFeo for the murders. At that point, we broke off all contact with William Weber.
They just disappeared off the face of Long Island after that.
With the Lutzes underground, interest in the Amityville horror story was building, and New York TV station Channel 5 were determined to get the scoop.
I got in touch with George Lutz and said, your family needs help, because they were clearly terrified.
Laura called in a celebrated pair of psychic investigators based in Connecticut, Ed and Lorraine Warren.
The type of work that we do is investigation into the paranormal, the supernatural, the preternatural, from haunting phenomena caused by human spirits or through poltergeist activity or the demonic inhuman hauntings. We've worked on numerous possession cases and exorcisms, and Warner Brothers has the rights to our life.
George Lutz met us at the edge of the property. He did not even want to step foot onto the grounds.
It was a horribly foreboding type of a feeling throughout the whole house. You knew that this house was infested by something other than human spirits.
When the Lutz family claimed that their home in Amityville was possessed, a local TV station assembled a team of psychics and arranged to film their investigation of the house.
They got parapsychologists, they brought in some other psychics, and it was arranged to go in there on the night of March 6th, 1976.
Soon after the Channel 5 news team and their reporter Marvin Scott arrived at the house, people began behaving unusually.
Nothing happened to me, but things were happening to people around me.
The way people were affected was just crazy.
First thing that happened, our cameraman, Steve, got to the landing on the second floor, and all of a sudden he bent over, clutching his chest. He had stabbing chest pains.
The overwhelming impression was very sad.
I had the impression of a teenager who had done something that had changed his life entirely, and he had committed something horrendous.
When we went up to the second floor, of course, the psychics could feel the remnants or the bad vibes. 6 people had been murdered violently there, you know, not 2 years before.
There was a window above me, and I saw a face of a young girl looking out at me. Then I heard crying, weeping. So I said, look to the white light, walk towards it, and everybody you love is waiting for you.
Lorraine, during the seance, said that she felt like there was some evil here that was from the bowels of the earth. It was not just the murdered spirits of the dead DeFeos.
I could see bodies all lined up, all with white sheets over them.
I got the impression of like hooded figures like monks right outside the door, closing the door well, looking in at me. I thought, uh-oh.
I get to the top and I go into a room, and Marvin Scott said to me, what is it? What is it? I said to him, I hope this is as close to hell as I'll ever get.
So I took the holy water and I opened it and I said, get thee behind me, Satan. And I went like that, and you could hear like water on a hot stove go, tss, and then everything in the house stopped.
After the seance was over, we proceeded downstairs. At that point, Ed had his crucifix and he was leading Lorraine. He stopped at one point, almost as if he was like thrown back by a gust of wind. And he later described it as being assailed by, I think, a legion of demons.
It's like the rush of water against my chest, holding you back so powerfully.
Again, as a reporter, I have to tell you, I did not see anything, I did not feel anything, other than the reaction of Ed, Lorraine, the other psychics, and the other people around me. At 2 in the morning, I remember Marvin Scott turning to me and saying, "We don't have it." In other words, this was not The Exorcist for television.
Although nothing happened for the TV cameras, one photograph taken that night would later apparently reveal a mysterious presence.
The camera was set up in a tripod and it just automatically shot off a flash photograph every few moments. And there were rolls and rolls of film of this particular doorway. It was into our daughter Missy's room. The photographs were being cataloged by a secretary I had years later in California. And she was pregnant. And every time she picked up this one particular picture, the baby inside her jumped.
And lo and behold, on the second floor in the doorway of one room, there is the distinct figure of a little boy peering out from the doorway. There were no children in the house that night. So it's like, okay, where did this come from?
And we called Missy and asked her, who was this? And she said, oh, that's the boy I used to play with there. First we had heard of that.
The Lutzes never returned to 112 Ocean Avenue. The bank reclaimed the property, and their possessions were auctioned off. George and Kathy moved to California, claiming that they needed to escape the influence of the house and the glare of publicity as their story gathered momentum.
Amityville becomes a sensation, and it's everywhere. It's in the news. It's all over Long Island. It's on the tips of everyone's tongue. Have you heard about this case, which is a compendium of all of the most horrific things that have ever happened in the paranormal, all in one case?
The psychics came out of the woodwork. Exorcists, parapsychologists, vampirologists, every one of them came out of the woodwork with a theory that they knew exactly what had happened there.
Among those joining the party was Professor Dr. Hans Holzer, America's most famous ghost hunter.
I particularly like this picture that clearly shows a white outline of a horse overimposed over me. Now it so happens that the entity in the house that was disturbed was an Indian chief on a horse.
Hans Holzer had been introduced to me as a man who had written about 50 books in the psychic arena, poltergeists and ghosts in the White House, ghosts in every house he's ever visited.
On January the 13th, 1977, Holzer, William Weber and Laura DiDio entered the house with renowned deep trance medium Ethel Johnson Myers.
The only thing you need is a good deep trance medium so that if an entity is present, they can use the vocal cords of the medium to make a conversation with me.
It's very eerie and quite shocking to see the physical transformation that this woman underwent.
As soon as we got out of the car, before we even entered the house, she said, "There's an Indian around here."
All of a sudden, she developed an Adam's apple.
After a while, this lady began talking in a strange, jabberish language.
Her voice dropped several octaves.
And she was talking with an Indian chief who was buried on that land.
Why are they angry?
Because it's been a sacred place, and this is over the very, very special chief. Oh, I can't move my face.
This turned out to be an Indian cemetery that had been used to build houses on, very much to the dismay of the Indian who was buried there.
And what does he make them do?
Violence of death. I don't know, my skull's cracked and my neck's stretched.
What will the male do under those circumstances?
Anything the Indian desires him to do.
Despite the fact that the people have said it's the most haunted house in America, it is not a truly haunted house. There are no ghosts there. There are no spirits there except the Indian chief. And what he wanted, from his point of view, was get off my land.
As the theories multiplied about what was in the house, Amityville was about to become a publishing sensation.
All of a sudden, it's a book. The book, for whatever reason, took off, I can't describe how quickly. It became an instant bestseller.
I think their initial printing was 25,000 books, and they had never printed anything even close to that with the first printing. And it sold out as soon as it reached the bookstores. It was rather quite phenomenal.
It was clear that this story of a haunted house had the power to captivate millions.
The idea that this actually happened to people makes those people closer, because if it's not out of somebody's imagination, then it's real and could really happen to them.
A home is supposed to be where you're safe. And the Amityville Horror destroys all that safe thinking. This happened right after William Peter Blatty's book, The Exorcist, and the movie The Exorcist came out circa 1973-74.
There seemed to be a hunger, a longing, perhaps maybe even kind of a spiritual question that was looming large about good versus evil.
Even people who professed to be agnostic or atheists were sleeping with the lights on after going to see that movie, clutching crucifixes and running back to church.
It seemed to provide a climate in which Amityville could breed.
The house itself had now become a personality, thanks to its distinctive top-floor windows.
Everybody would say to me, "What did you think about those two eyes? The eyes that watch you." I mean, I've heard this a lot.
They became the eyes of the house, you know, and if you look at it, you say, that house is looking at me, and that gave it this evil persona.
Something's watching, something's hidden, something's watching.
The next incarnation of the Lutz's story came when Amityville got the Hollywood treatment.
What happened to them is an experience in terror you will never forget, and you will believe in the Amityville Horror.
George and Kathleen Lutz are with us this morning to talk about what happened during those 28 days in Amityville. Lutzes, good morning to you both.
The hype over Amityville on national television and told their story to an eager public.
Within a week, Kathy's hand had been touched by something that we discussed and couldn't explain. It was just something unseen.
We also had hordes of flies that would appear within 2 rooms, and no matter how many times we would kill them, they would reappear.
When they sold those books and the motion picture came out, all hell broke loose.
It was a media frenzy. I mean, people just descended on the village of Amityville.
People from Ireland, people from England, people from all over Europe.
They were plagued not by ghosts inside or demons, but by tourists.
In the rainstorms and thunderstorms, as many as 50 people staying there with their hands together, just looking at the house like it was a religion.
On Ocean Avenue, people's lawns were just crushed with people parking their cars and trying to get to the horror house.
I had busloads. People in my backyard picnicking, nuns from Sweden. They got stuck on my driveway. I don't know how they even got down my driveway.
People running up and wanting to grab a piece of the house, pulling up a piece of the lawn, taking off a piece of the siding of the house.
One woman hit a cop over the head so hard with a pocketbook she almost knocked him out.
Anything so that they could go and peer into the windows and really be annoying.
It just went on and on and on.
But just as thousands of tourists seemed convinced by the Amityville story, so there were growing numbers who suspected a hoax.
Jay Anson writes this thick tome, The Amityville Horror True Story. And I thought, something here smells bad.
The original articles that came out, they said that they did not see any human forms and that they just had strange noises, bumps, banging in the pipes, things like this.
They were experiencing what on the surface appeared to be some low-level psychic phenomenon. No levitation, no windows being shattered, no doors wrenched off their hinges by unseen forces.
By the time they got to the book, they had green slime and red slime and marching bands and Jody the Demon Pig.
We had 116 obvious errors, physical errors, in the book. And that's before you get down to floating pigs.
There was a picture that Missy had drawn, one of the Lush children, of Jody the demonic pig that she said would often appear up on the second floor windowsill with its red eyes peering in. We started talking to some of the neighbors, and one of the neighbors said to us, "Oh, what does it look like?" And we showed the picture that was in the book, and they said, Oh, that's the cat that Ronald DeFeo called the pig because he was fat.
Well, the pig happened to be my wife had a Persian cat. It was a Persian cat, I'm sure.
This cat would actually jump up into the window and stand there and stare with those red glowing eyes.
And what about those infamous flies?
My God, the murder took place. The victims were removed after 48 hours. The house was then sealed up, and the heat was on. Just doesn't take a brain scientist to figure out how you end up with flies.
As part of their investigation, Jordan and Moran interviewed Jim and Barbara Cromarty, who bought the house after the Lutzes left.
We asked them if when they moved into the house they had made any major repairs. Because if you read the book, you get the impression that this whirlwind of paranormal activity sweeps through the house and leaves it in a state of shambles. No, they tell us. Everything was in perfect shape when they walked through it and they made their purchase.
My husband did a program in which he debated George Lutz, and George Lutz tried to say that the window in the house had slammed down on his son's hand, and he had taken him to Brunswick Hospital to be treated. So my husband said, well, we'll just subpoena the records of Brunswick Hospital, and then you can prove that. And he said, well, I didn't really take him to the hospital. We bandaged it at home. So the story would change if you tried to pin him down.
I remember when we walked into one of the rooms, there was a window where it was claimed. If you stood in the center of the room, the window would suddenly open and shut violently all by itself. It was on the second floor. So we ran into this room, Rick and I. And Rick pointed out that the floorboards seemed to be slightly uneven. And he started shifting his foot along the floor. And suddenly, the window shot up. I thought I was going to jump out of my shoes backwards. I shrieked. The counterweights are improperly set. And the window was such that if you did this, you could actually make this window go up and then come down.
Confusion surrounds much of this. I don't know that that it will ever be undone in talking about evil. And evil is the absence of God's presence. And as such, then confusion is going to be part of that.
The skeptics had gathered their evidence, and the believers prepared for battle. But what was the truth about the Amityville horror? 2 years after they fled from their home, claiming that they had been driven out by supernatural forces, the tale of the Lutz family was published as The Amityville Horror, a True Story. It was an instant bestseller, and author Jay Anson became the focus of a furious row over what really happened.
What it did was open my eyes to the fact that somebody could write a book, put right on the front cover a true story, and then make up 90% of what was inside.
I spoke to Jay, and I said, Jay, do you believe this story? And he said, I'm a writer. That's what I do, is I write. That's all. You know, whether or not it's true or whether it's not true, that's for somebody else to decide.
Of course the literary license was taken. We're not in support of this aspect of the Amityville horror.
Peter Jordan and Rick Moran confronted Anson with their evidence that the book was not a true story, but a work of fiction.
He said, you're one of those naysayers. You're a skeptic who likes to write non-ghost stories. I like to make money.
Jay said to me, I'm a writer. My only interest is to write a best-selling book so that I can build a house in Majorca and never have to write again.
And one day I predict, he said, that you are going to be sitting there broke, writing your little non-ghost stories, and I'm going to be in an island out in the Bahamas or somewhere with a truckload of cashmere sweaters. And I remember thinking it was the funniest thing, and I started cackling, and he said, what's so funny? And I said, that is the most ridiculous fantasy that any millionaire could ever have. And then after that, I was coming home from somewhere out in Long Island, had the radio on, and Jay Anson, author of The Amityville Horror, suffered a tragic heart attack today, and I thought, oh, he never got to enjoy that truckload of cashmere sweaters.
Although he never had time to enjoy it, Anson made millions from Amityville in comparison with the Lutzes, whose share was said to be only $250,000. However, George still stands by the author and the book.
He had the most difficult of jobs to explain something he didn't believe in or understand. And he managed a very, very accurate book compared to anything else that's ever been done since.
But accuracy was not something that troubled the makers of the Amityville horror film.
From the best-selling book that made millions believe in the unbelievable.
The original movie took real license, with blood dripping down the walls and the flies attacking the priest the way they did. They could have just as easily have done the flies the way they really happened.
I wasn't really concerned about whether or not it was a true story. It didn't matter to me. I had to create a reality of my own.
I'm coming apart! Oh, Mother of God, I'm coming apart!
I had for 25, 28 years, whatever it is, had such a terrible problem with that film. It's like a documentary compared to what's been most recently done.
George Lutz dislikes the recent film so much that he is suing its makers, MGM. This is the latest of many legal actions he has taken over the years in order to protect the facts of what he claims is the true story. And since Kathy Lutz's premature death earlier this year, he must now do this alone.
She and I experienced this together, and we moved past it together. And we tried to explain it to the world, if you will, together. Her passing means I lost my partner of that experience. That doesn't give license to anyone to create some kind of revisionist history now of what she had to say while she was alive.
But there are some who say that Kathy's death is the most recent example of the evil influence of the house in Amityville.
One of the things that happened to her in the house is she looked into the mirror and she saw this old lady in the mirror. She died in Phoenix of a disease, of a respiratory disease that caused her to age about 30 years. So when she passed away, she really looked very old.
It affected Ronald DeFeo one way. It affected the Lutzes another way. It affects everybody that goes into that house.
There have been a lot of other things that have happened during this case where unusual deaths, but you know, it's got to be attributed to coincidence, nothing else.
People want to believe there's something supernatural. There's something beyond just us. There's a heaven. There's a hell. There are prayers that are answered. There are spirits. There are ghosts. We want to believe in that kind of phenomena. We have a need to. And with that need comes the gullibility factor, frankly, when somebody says, oh, this is a true story.
It's the most documented event of its kind in terms of how many people were involved, how many people witnessed on their own or saw their own or have had their testimony unchanged for all these years.
Do I believe that they were in that house for 28 days? No. Categorically, undeniably, no.
I think that they had this whole thing planned, and they were going to write a book about it and make themselves a lot of money. And, you know, they did.
If a story sounds like it's too good to be true, it probably is. And this was exactly a perfect example of this, possibly the most monumentally successful example of that I've ever encountered, and probably ever will encounter in my lifetime. I don't think we'll ever see another Amityville, or I hope not.
They weren't there. They didn't live it. They didn't experience it. And yet they would explain it to you. And that's really a disservice to everyone.
Unless we get a spirit who actually shows up and explains it on camera, which I doubt is going to happen, we're not going to know. So we will keep pursuing the elusive thing, whatever that thing is.
The current inhabitor of the house doesn't believe in any of it. Belief or disbelief has nothing to do whatsoever with what happens. I wish him well. I hope that spontaneous fires will not disturb his sleep or whatever else he does. And I wait for the headlines if and when they occur.